change the key often, that will reduce the chances or the risk of someone eavesdropping.
Yeah. So it's more or less a precaution. It's very similar to changing passwords. Why do we change passwords regularly? Well, it's because we never know when our password has been compromised. The same for key. We don't know when it's compromised. And if it has been compromised, then until we change it, someone can follow our communication and see what we're doing and decrypt it. So we would like to change now then, just to be on the safe side. Also, in encryption, we have another reason, and that is the more information we have that is being used and encrypted with one key, the easier the cryptanalysis will be. So we want to limit the amount of information that is encrypted with one key to make it harder. So if we regularly switch, there will never be enough to make cryptanalysis. So we have the keys that we need to change, and since getting the key over to the other side is a little bit problematic, we really need some help doing that. Well, not sure that this says much more. Well, we can talk about the second point. To provide confidentiality, one must encrypt identification and session key, which requires a previous share key. Because, okay, say that we need to distribute this key and we need to change it regularly. Well, we still need to distribute it in a secure way, and in a secure way means that it's encrypted. So we have this problem that we need to have it encrypted, but to do that we need a key, so we have this bootstrap problem. Timeliness is another security concern that we might also have to add here. And timeliness is this requirement that a message is in the correct time. That is not so much concerned with the keys, but it is concerned with the authenticity of a message. So to be authentic, the message needs to be from a correct person, as I said before, and in the correct time. And keys can help with that, but for timeliness, we probably also need something like timestamps or challenge response methods that makes it possible to check that, yes, this is a current request, not an old. So we can make a challenge response to check that it's active right now. So these are different security concerns for authentication in general, you can say. Now let's focus on the key distribution. And here we have 4 different schemes for how we can set up key distribution for a normal conventional encryption. So the first one says that we physically deliver a key from A to B. And yes, that works if we don't have to do it too often. But now we said that we actually need to change keys now and then. So physical delivery key won't work, not even if we are quite close to each other. And if it's long distance, then it's even harder, of course. Okay, second one then, a third party could select the key and physically deliver it to A and B. Would that help in some way to get an authentication of a key? Now we have someone here, a third party. We have user A and we have user B, and they want to be able to communicate. And to communicate, they need this secret key, so we can do this transformation, security transformation. So what I'm saying here is number 2 then is that, okay, we use this third party here that manually somehow distribute the key to us. Would that improve the situation compared to number 1, when it's A who distributes the key to B directly? Yes?
Yes, it helps, but we have to trust the third party.
That's a very good point. For this to be useful at all, we need to trust this third party. We need to have trust in that. And both A and B need to have trust in this third party. Okay, so let's assume that we do have that.
It would still take a long time.
It will still take a long time. It will even take longer time because now we have to physically go to 2 different places instead of just 1. So the question is, have we gained anything here?
If we have A and B on 2 different continents, for example, and then we have a third party who has bases on both those continents, then it would actually reduce the time required to deliver
Okay.
the keys.
Right, so if we change the situation a little bit and say that, yes, we had a third party here, but that third party actually have some type of infrastructure that is, as I say, covering many different physical places, so they can somehow securely communicate between those branches and then physically deliver to both sides. Yeah, that may help, as long as they can then have some secure way of communicating between these branches here. So it may help, but the main thing here really that can help is for A to B to have some trust between themselves. Because A and B might not know each other before here. So how can they know who they are? Well, if both have some relation with this trusted party here, which we both trust in, this third party can vouch for them and say, yes, A is A and B is B, and yes, now we can start communicating using this key. So we gain some trust between A and B with the help of this third party, if we now trust it. Okay, then we have a third idea, because we still have a problem, because we still have to physically deliver, which is not very good one. But number 3 then, if A and B have previously used a key, one party could transmit the new key to the other, encrypted using only the old key. Okay, so we remove a third party again, and we physically deliver one key. But once we have done that, we can encrypt that key, or we can encrypt new keys with that old key. So we can actually create a key hierarchy now. We have one permanent key between A and B, and whenever we need to have a new session key, we encrypt it just with that. And the only thing we encrypt are these session keys, nothing else, which means that the amount of text that will be encrypted with that permanent key is quite small. So we can use that for a long time and just create new session keys. So yes, that will help us to set up this key hierarchy. But we still have the initial problem here of physical delivery of the first key. So it's still not a perfect solution. Oops, sorry. Fourth one then. A and B each have an encrypted connection to third party C. C could deliver the session keys. So we'll go back to this idea with third party. But now we have some type of secure tunnel to deliver the keys here, which are encrypted with some master key. So they could have this channel again, so they can create a new session key to the different branches. They deliver that session key to both of us through these encrypted tunnels because we have initially set up an arrangement between ourselves and trusted third party. If now we want to communicate with someone else, so A wants to communicate with C instead, down here. What is needed? Well, what is needed now is that C is also having some relation with this third party. And as long as C have this relation, we can just ask the third party, okay, I would like to communicate with C. Could you please create a session key and deliver to both of us? And now we can start communicating. So we only need to make a physical delivery of a key once. That is this master key between each node and this trusted third party. Once we have set that up, we can communicate with anyone in a secure way by allowing that third party to distribute keys to us. So we have these session levels, session keys and permanent key that we already said. That is important that we have this hierarchy. And it could work like this then. We have a key distribution center at the top here. Each host have what's called a front-end processor, which automatically identifies who we're communicating with. Whenever we start a new communication, the front-end processor will automatically ask for a new session key from the key distribution center. It will deliver to both parties. They both get a new session key. They start communicating with each other. And it's as long as we have made this set up once with a key distribution center, it all works automatically. So, do you see any problems with this solution? Or is it working perfectly now for us? No problems at all? Well, we still need to trust the key distribution center, right? So that is an initial trust we need to have. And depending on how we set it up, we have to trust them quite a lot, because if they create the session keys and distribute to everyone, that means the key distribution center can decrypt all traffic between all parties, which would be quite a big trust. But we don't have to set up. We can set up in a way that the key distribution center distributes keys that are then parameterized somehow by the hosts and make it impossible for the key distribution center to decrypt it. So we can solve that problem. But the bigger problem is that it doesn't exist on the internet. There is no such key distribution center that everyone is using and that everyone is trusting and then can distribute symmetric keys to anyone on the internet. It's just too big a task to set that up. So it doesn't exist. So it's only working within a limited domain. We can say that for a company we can set it up, or for a number of companies that work together, but we have to define a limited domain and decide, okay, this is our key distribution center and it works for us. But it can never work on the internet's wide scale, unfortunately. And Kerberos then is such a service that works for a limited domain. You probably are familiar with the story about Kerberos, this many-headed dog that guards the entrance to the Hades, the death. All the dead people go. They're really guarding so no one leaves, I guess. But yeah, they have the keys. So we have to ask Kerberos to get the key to get into a system. So it's quite an old protocol now, actually. It was developed initially, as you see, from MIT, and then it was standardized, so it's an internet standard today. Provides a centralized private key third-party authentication in distributed network. So it's 4 private keys. Doesn't use public keys at all, so it's only using private keys and that type of encryption. It's a distributed network. We have different nodes, but it's a distributed network where we have to decide who can join here. And the idea is to handle authentication mainly. So we can authenticate against different services. But it's doing that by supplying us with keys, encryption keys. Let's see about 2 versions, 4 and 5. 5 is of course better since it's newer, but it's still number 4, which is very old, is still used somehow actually. Windows 2000 and later versions of Windows actually use Kerberos on the inside to handle authentication within a distributor. So when you set up a domain server for Windows to add users who should be able to log in remotely and so on, you're actually using Kerberos, but you don't see it because it's hidden in Windows. So we have the basic idea is that we have a number of users, distributed users. They want to be able to log into different services that we have. And to do that, they need to authenticate against these services. So that's at the basis for Kerberos. In that situation, we have a number of typical threats that Kerberos is intended to handle, as you see. Someone pretends to be another user. Well, obviously, we need to catch that, because that is what authentication is about. We want to be able to show that, yes, you are that user and not someone else. The question is how to do that, and what do we need in order to prove who we are? Is it enough to have a password? Do we need to log in from a certain host? Does it have to be time within a certain time window? So we can have different demands of that, but we need to define it and meet it somehow. The second attack is part of that. A user alters as a network address or workstation, which is quite easy. We can easily pretend to be another address in a network. How can we see that and stop that type of attack? And then we have eavesdropper who listening in, which means that if you send something on the network, we need to make sure that it's encrypted, so it doesn't matter if someone listens. There are quite a few things to in the Kerberos protocol, so we need to define a number of things here. First, we have a client, that is C. That is someone who would like to log into a server. We have an authentication server, AS. That is on the basis of a Kerberos, one who actually checks who you are and that you are allowed to log in. V is the server that the server wants to log in, the client wants to log in. It could be mail server, print server, file server, whatever. It has some services. Then we have IDC, the identifier of C. IDV, identifier V. So both server that we log into and the client need to identify somehow to match. We have password for the client. So we log in with a user and a password. The client is at a certain network address, ADC, so we know what network address we should have. We have a secret encryption key, KV, that is channeled between the authentication server and V. So this is one of the initial setups that need to be done. Each server that would like to provide a service in our distributed environment need to register with the authentication server. And when we register, we also exchange private key. Which means that the authentication server and all the different servers can communicate in a secure way by encrypting everything with that key. But TS is timestamp, and this last is just concatenation. We just add up a number of things into a message exchange. So with these terms here, we can start looking at how Kerberos works. And we'll build this in 3 different steps. First, look at the very basic idea of what Kerberos is doing, and then we will add more things just to make it secure enough. So this is a simple authentication using Kerberos then. In the first step, a client is sending a message to the authentication server. And the client provides information here. We are saying that, okay, I am client this one, this is my password, and I would like to log into a certain server. Now the authentication server decides if we should be allowed to do that or not, if we have access rights, and if we can authenticate correctly with our ID and our password. That one. So we need to supply these 3 things to know, to prove who we are and where we want to log in. If now the authentication server says yes, that is okay, you prove who you are and you have right. What they will do then is send a ticket from the authentication server to the client. Say, okay, with this ticket, you now have the rights to access the server. And down here we can look at what the ticket is. As you see, the ticket is encrypted. It's encrypted with the conventional encryption algorithm, like this or OS. And the key that is used is this KD that was shared between the server and the authentication server. Which means that, okay, the authentication server encrypted this information. The only one who can decrypt it is the specific server that we would like to access. So no one else can see what the ticket contains. It doesn't matter if we try to send the ticket to some other server. It wouldn't be able to decrypt it, so it wouldn't allow us to use the service. What it contains is just this information, who we are, our password, and that we have the right to access that server. What we do now is we take this ticket and we send it to the server we would like to use. And again, we supply who we are and the ticket that we got that proves that we have the right to use that server. And now the server can decide, yes, with this ticket you have proven that you have the right to use my service, and it starts to offer the server whatever it is to you. So this is the authentication dialog here. Okay, can you see any problems with this authentication dialog here? Yes?
Once you give the ticket, can't you use it the other time when you want to access the server?
Yeah, okay. The ticket, once we have received this ticket, we can use it indefinitely. And that is not a good idea, because the next day we may change our rules in the organization so that user shouldn't be allowed to use that service anymore. But we still have a ticket, which means that we can show it. So yes, that is a problem. We don't have any limitation for how long a ticket lasts. Can you see any other problems? Yeah.
First communication is not encrypted.
Yeah, the first step in the communication is in plain text, which means that anyone can see my password who listens to the network. And since they have my password, that means that now they can log into any service that I have access right to. Yes, so there are a number of limitations here. So there are problems with this simple dialog. Password in clear text, well, solution is easy. We have to encrypt the first exchange somehow. Another problem is that we need to authenticate on each request. Whenever we would like to log into a new server, we would need to authenticate again to get the ticket to that server. And that means we have to log in again. We have to give our password and user. So each time we log into a new server, we need to get the ticket to that, and we need to authenticate each time. What we would like to have is a system that says that, okay, when we come first in the morning, we log in once, and once we have done that, then we can access all the different services. Then the ticket times out, so the next day we have to log in again to get security authentication, but we don't have to log into each server. So to do that, well, part of the solution is to have a lifetime for tickets, but part of the solution is actually also that we have to split up the login into 2 different steps that we'll look at. So that is what we see down here. So the exchange is actually a bit more complex. So now we have extended the exchange into 5 different messages instead. The first one, the client sets to the authentication server that I am me, and I send along a message saying that I would like to contact a ticket granting server. So TGS stands for ticket granting server. What we have done now is actually we split up our Kerberos system into 2 different parts. We have the authentication server, who is checking authentication, who we are, who we say. And we have a ticket granting server who decides what different servers we should be able to access. So we say that, okay, I would like to contact the ticket granting server to be able to access a ticket for a certain server. The authentication server now has, its task is to authenticate us. And it's doing that by sending us an encrypted message. Note here, in the first exchange, we don't give any password. So we have removed that problem from the first exchange. What we send now is actually an encrypted message here. And what we do is that we encrypt a ticket to the ticket granting server with a KC. And KC is a key that has been previously manually delivered between the client and the authentication server. So earlier I said that all servers need to sign up with the Kerberos system by exchanging key. Now we say that all clients have to do the same thing. They need to sign up with the authentication server manually one time and exchange a key. So this ticket is encrypted, and in the ticket we see that, okay, this is what the ticket contains. It contains information about who we are. It contains information about the address, where we come from. It contains information about the ticket granting server that we would like to access. And then it has timestamp and a lifetime. So we can say that, okay, it was created at a certain time and it lasts for a certain amount of time. Since it's encrypted, we are the only one who can decrypt it, since it's encrypted with KC. So it's sent on the network. If anyone else captures this message, they couldn't do anything about it. It's only the correct client who can decrypt it, since the correct client has this KC. Once it's decrypted, we have a ticket. That ticket says that now we can contact, in the second exchange here, the ticket granting server. So that's what we're doing. We send a message from the client to the ticket granting server. In it, we say who we are, and we say which server we would like to contact. This could be the mail server, for instance. We would like to log into the mail server, and then we supply the ticket that we got from authentication server, who gives us the right to use the ticket grant server. And this means that we have authenticate, because that is what we do up here with this encryption. The ticket granting server will investigate our ticket, of course, to make sure that the ticket is okay by decrypting it. And the ticket is encrypted with a key that is a change between the authentication server and the ticket grant server. So it's only the ticket grant server who can decrypt it. So again, the information is secure. Once the ticket grant server have reviewed all of this information and says, yes, it seems to be okay, it looks in its database to see, is this user here actually allowed to use the server that he would like to use? And if so, he will create a ticket, another ticket then. So that's what we have down here. And this ticket says that, yes, this user from this address can use the mail server, and that ticket was created at a certain time. It has a certain lifetime. Again, this ticket is encrypted, so it's only, and it's encrypted with the key that was given by the server. So again, this ticket, no one can see what it contains except the server that would like to use. So the client gets that but couldn't use it, couldn't see what it contains. It can just forward it. And that is what happens down here in the last exchange. The client now sends that ticket to the server together with its identity, say that I am me, and this ticket proves that I can use your service. Say now that the client would like to use another service. It would also like to use the file server. Well, in that case, we can skip the first part here, because we already authenticated. We already have authenticated. So the only thing we need to do is send a new message to the ticket grant server saying that, okay, I would also like to access another server. And as long as we have access right to that, the ticket granting service will grant us another ticket for that one. So for each service that we would like to use in our network, we gather tickets from a ticket granting server, but that can be done automatically because we're already authenticated. So as long as the lifetime for this ticket is valid, we don't have to authenticate again. And each new ticket that we gather, we can submit to the server. That ticket can have a shorter lifetime. If it times out, we have to request a new ticket. But so as long as this ticket is still valid, that can also be done automatically. So, are there any problems with this exchange? It's not so that obvious to see, but there are actually still some problems here. So this is still not enough. One problem is that lifetime. How long should it be? If it's too short, then we have to log in many times. If it's too long, then we open up a longer window for different types of attacks, replay attacks or attacks on gathering information and be able to crack the key. So that is something that we really need to think about. And maybe we need to add more different timing information really to handle this. Problem number 2 is of another type here. As a rogue server can give incorrect credentials. What is a rogue server? A server that is compromised, then not typically, no.
The server that's not following the standards and making up its own rules?
More or less, but it's still not to the point what a rogue server is.
Is it the server that's trying to impersonate?
Yes, exactly, it's impersonating. It's someone claims, well, I'm your mail server, use me. And works like your mail server, so when you log into it, it looks to be a mail server. And if it's really well done, you won't notice it. Well, a mail server would be hard because then it would need to be able to supply your emails, which you probably couldn't, even if it's rogue. But there are other types of rogue systems, like a rogue access point. Someone set up an access point. It looks to be a genuine one. It has the same name as the real access point. You log into it, accepts any login, just to be able to get your traffic routed through it so it can inspect your traffic. So that would be a rogue access point. So a rogue server is someone that mimics, it impersonates someone else. And the problem with the previous exchange is that the client in step 5 here identifies to the server and say that, okay, I am me, I have a ticket so I can use you, but the server doesn't get back. So there is no authentication of a server here. So the full exchange, what the actual Kerberos protocol looks like is this. We have to submit a little bit more information in each step. It's still roughly the same as before. The first 2 parts, number 1 and 2 here, is client authenticating against the authentication server. We just have to submit a little bit more information to make it really secure. The second part, number 3 and 4 here, is that the client goes to the ticket granting server to get a ticket for each different service it would like to get. Again, we have to supply a little bit more information to make it really secure. As you see, lots of timestamps, and we have something called an authenticator as well. So there are a lot of things here. And the third part here, when we communicate with a server, is extended with one more message exchange. So it's not only that the client now sends to the server, but the server actually has to reply back to the client and authenticate itself as well. So both have been authenticated. So this is the full exchange of Kerberos. And this is what this Kerberos system looked like then. We have the Kerberos system over here split up in 2 parts, the authentication server and the ticket grant server. It could be on the same machine or it could be on separate machines. We have a database here with user information and how they can authenticate. The ticket granting server also have information about what service we have access rights to. Then we have different clients and we have different servers. So in this example, we have just one client, one server. So we start here with login, number 1 in the Kerberos. And we get a ticket back with a ticket so we can contact the ticket granting server. The next step is that we send that here and we get the ticket back to access a specific server. We send that ticket to the server, who then replies back to authenticate. And after that, we have authenticated both to the Kerberos system and to the server. And now we can use that service. And if we would like to access another server, as I said before, we can skip exchange 1 and 2, just ask for a new ticket from a ticket granting server, and then send that to the server. Again, this is just another way to show the exchange. Client starts with authentication server, then we have exchange with ticket granting server, and then number 5 and 6 with the service provider, whatever that is. Kerberos has been extended then with something called Kerberos realms. Kerberos environment, as you see, consists of a server, number of clients, and number of servers that provides different services. And that is a realm. And typically, all of that is under a single administrator. So one like the university here. The university is a realm. And in the IT department, they create your user accounts, they set up passwords, they make sure that you can log into different servers, they handle how the different servers communicate with the Kerberos system and so on. So that is all handled by one organization. But if you want to connect multiple realms, it gets a little bit more tricky. Say that Liveström, a company here, Liveström, would like to start a cooperation with some other company. They have their own systems, but they are starting now a closer cooperation. So they need their users to be able to log into each other's services. Well, one solution would be to set up, to exchange, replace the old systems they had with a new Kerberos system, create one big realm. But that's not very flexible, because the next year we may communicate with someone else instead, work with someone else. And it doesn't scale too well. We couldn't build a Kerberos realm that handles millions of users. Couldn't really handle that. So instead we talk about connecting realms to each other. So in this example here we have a client over here. That client communicates initially with one realm here, with a ticket granting server in one realm. And what we can add here is that we can grant tickets for another realm. So once we have authenticated in our realm, we can ask for a ticket to talk to another realm. And that's what happens here. We get a ticket, we have authenticated in our realm, and now we ask for a ticket in another realm. We supply that to the ticket granting server in the other realm, saying that, yes, I am authenticated in my system, they know who I am, and you two have set up an cooperation between you. So you here will acknowledge my authentication over here. So once you say that, okay, I come from this other realm, I would like to use your service, then they can give you a ticket for that, and you can use the service in another realm. But you still authenticate in your own realm. So that's how we can build up cooperation between different Kerberos realms. Okay, version 5 have some improvements over version 4. We have a long list here of minor things. Important things is that version 4 was only using DES as encryption algorithm, and we know now that DES is not secure enough. So in number 5, it's independent. We can use whatever encryption algorithm we would like to use. Another difference is that in version 4, we could only use IP as on the network layer for delivering traffic. Version 5 says that we can use whatever basic network standard we like. As long as on top of that, we have implemented Kerberos, we can use maybe a DECnet or an Apple Talk, whatever, on the lower levels. And then there are some other things that have changed in what algorithms to use. A little bit on the technical details on how we build the messages and so on, but quite small changes, and it doesn't change the exchange that we saw before. It still looks the same, or just details that have been changed. So version 5, that is the current one, is still working the same. So how does it work in practical life? Well, to use it, you need to set up this key distribution center, this Kerberos center in your network. You need to have the access server and the ticket granting server. You need to manually distribute keys to all the servers and all the clients somehow. You need to Kerberise your applications. For this to work like in an automatic way, when you start up your email, for instance, for it to use Kerberos, it needs to know what Kerberos is, and that needs to be part of the application. So the application will ask your access server or the ticket granting server, and then send that on to the mail server, that ticket. So for it to work, all the applications need to know about Kerberos. So it's a little bit, takes a lot of work. But today, of course, most applications that are interesting are Kerberized. And these are applications that are typically used within an organization. Remember that. These are not meant to be internet-wide. It doesn't talk about web servers that you can access some other another place in the world. These are applications and services that are typically supplied within an organization to users. So it's not all applications that need to be Kerberized. But it's quite a lot of work to set it up. Okay, well, let's take a break here. Just 5-6 minutes something, and then we'll continue with X509 instead. Okay. X509 authentication service. How many knows about this already, what it is? A little. How often do you think you use it?
I think almost every day.
Yeah, every day. You probably use it hundreds of times each day, I would guess, most of you. Each time you access a web server somewhere, you probably use this. And you may use it for other services as well. But web is the main place where it's used today. So what is it? Well, as you see, a distributed set of servers that maintain a database about users, okay? The key thing here is that it's distributed. It's no central system. There are actually a lot of different databases around the world with different users, or most specifically, information about someone together with a public key. That someone can be a person, it can be a specific physical server, it can be an organization, so it can be different things, but something or an entity linked to a public key. That is what this database contains. So, as I said, each certificate contains a public key. It's signed by, as we very briefly saw last week, it's signed by a CA, a certificate authority. So someone have looked at this information and signed and saying, yes, this is correct information in this certificate. It's used for many different protocols, but SSL TLS is probably where you mostly meet it. RSA is the recommended public encryption algorithm, but that actually shifted over time. So today, elliptic curve cryptography, ECC, is taking over more and more. So that is the type of public keys that are, I think, mainly used today, actually. So that recommendation has been phased out, you could say. This is what X509 is at the core. It's just a document with different type of information. So let's see what we have here. First, we have a version number. So there are different versions of X509. So it can say version 1, 2, 3. So we know what else to expect. And to the right here, you can see that version 1 contains some field, version 2 has added a few fields, and version 3 have added even more fields. So it's just more information in each version. Otherwise, they are the same, actually. The next field, certificate serial number. Now, this is, as I said, a distributed database. In many different places, certificates are created, which means that that serial number is not a unique serial number. It's only unique within the certificate authority that created it. And that is what we have down here, issue name. That is who created it. So this could say VeriSign, for instance. VeriSign created this certificate, and the serial number is only unique for VeriSign then. Before that, we have, as you see, something called signature algorithm identifier. So that's how the signature have been made, how we sign this certificate, all the information here. We sign it using RSA or ECC. And there are some parameters that may be needed. We might need some initialization vector. We might need to know if it's 2000 bits or 4000 bits that was used. So there are some parameters in order to know exactly how to use that algorithm when it was signed. And we need to know that when we check the certificate. Then it was easier said, and then we have a period of validity. As you see, we can say both not before and not after. We can say that this certificate is only valid from next month and for 1 year. And typical times for certificate is a year. Sometimes that can be longer, can be 3 years. That is a negotiation between the user who would like to have a certificate and the certificate authority. So if we ask for a certificate that should have lasted 3 years, maybe we have to pay a little bit more. But it depends. The reason for having a limitation is, of course, again, for security concerns. We don't want a public key to last forever. We need to replace it now and then. And when we replace it, we don't want an old certificate to still say that it is still okay. Okay, and then we have a subject name. And the subject name is the one who owns this public key. So it could be a person, or it could be an organization, or a server, physical server. And then we have information about the subject's public key. So again, we need to know what algorithm are we using, what parameters is needed for that algorithm, and the key. What key do we have here? Well, obviously it's the public key of our key pair. This subject, whoever it is, have created a key pair. One private and one public key. The private key we keep for ourselves. But the public key we can write in the certificate. Because that is public knowledge. Anyone should know it. So it might as well stand here as well. We don't keep it secret. So that was what we had in version 1. In version 2, we added, as you see, issue unique identifier and subject unique identifier. It's not enough just to have a names. If there are thousands of certificate authorities out there, it can be hard to recognize them by the name. So there is a list of unique identifiers, so we can easily see who it was who created it. And again, a unique identifier within that certificate authority for the user. The serial number is for the certificate, but this is for the user. So the same user could have many different certificates for different public keys, but we can know who it is. So that was one extension. When the standard grew, that came as something that was needed. After that, new ideas came up. Well, maybe we should add this, and maybe we should add that. And of course, they could have continued to pull out new versions of a standard for each new idea that we would like to add. But instead of doing that, they built in this mechanism with extensions, which means that we can add many different extensions. It's an open-ended list. So if we come up with something new, we just add it as a new extension. We don't have to revise the standard. The standard allows us to add new extensions whenever. So for that reason, the standard has been stable since then. We still are using version 3 that has been around for quite a long time now, but there are new extensions added now and then instead. At the end here, for all versions, we have the signature, and the signature is what proves that all the information above is correct. So the signature, well, again, we say what algorithms and parameters are used for the signature. Exactly the same thing as is up here, actually. And then the encrypted hash. The hash of all the information here, encrypted with the certificate authority's private key. So we have signed it. We'll come back to the revocation list in a while. But this is then, remember from last week, how we created the signature. We filled in all this information in the certificate. We take a hash of it. This is a small hash digest now. We encrypted using the CA's private key. That will create an encrypted hash. And then we include that in the signature at the end. So this is the full certificate that we can now start distribute on the internet. So the digital signature principle or process in general then. Here we have Bob and Alice. Bob creates a message SSC, creates a cryptographic hash of that, encrypts that hash, and that would be the signature. When Alice gets the message, she takes the hash, she takes the S here from Bob, uses Bob's public key to decrypt that. Now we have the hash that was part of a message, and now we can compare them, and if they are the same, then the message was okay. And that's exactly how we check the certificate then. Once the certificate is out there, if you want to check that the certificate is okay, we take the certificate, we extract the signature part of it and decrypt that with the CA's public key then. How can we get the public key of the certificate authority? How can we find that? Well, in the certificate, we say what algorithm is used and what parameters is used and the encrypted hash, but not the public key of the CA. The only key that is here is the public key of the user. So no, the CA's public key is not in the certificate. So where can we get it? Well, CAs are well-known entities on the internet. There are big companies who are well-known. Their public keys are published on different places. They are published on their websites, they are published on other websites. We can even call them up if we want to and ask them what is your public key, and we can get it over the phone. But in practice, what is happening is that they have gathered a list of all CA's public keys, and that is part of the list that is supplied with operating systems of any computer. So you already have in your computer a list of public keys for the major CIs. So whenever you would like to check a certificate from one of these, you actually already have it in your operating system, a list with public keys. So how can we obtain one? Well, the certificates are signed by certificate authorities, of course. They can also help set it up and create it. But we need to have a relation with the CA to get it. They don't do it for free, typically. Some do, but most don't. So you need to have a business relationship with the CA in order to get a certificate. Once you have that, you create the key pair, and then you submit the public key to give information, and then the CA creates this certificate for you. A user with access to the public key of a CA can recover it. And that is also an important part of certificates. And that is the right part on this figure here, showing what's called a certificate revocation list. At any time, a certificate may need to be revoked. We may need to say that, well, the public key that is in this certificate is not used anymore. And there can be different reasons for that. So we need to be able to revoke them. And that means that all CAs have a list of revoked certificates. And that is what we call this certificate revocation list. It's a very simple list, as you see at the top. We have information about the algorithm that was used to sign the list. We have an issue name, who the CA is. We have when the list was updated and the next schedule update. So we know when to look next time for a list. And then we have a long list of revoked certificates. And as you see, what we have here is just the user certificate serial number, the one up here, and a revocation date, when it was revoked. And then comes the next one. And then at the end, the entire list is signed by the CA, so no one else can claim, can revoke them. It has to be the CA who can do it. Now, as I said, there are hundreds of CAs, even thousands perhaps. And actually, anyone can create certificates. So you can start creating your own certificates and sign them and work as a CA. The question is, would anyone trust those certificates? So how can we trust certificates? Well, in order to trust a certificate, we need to trust the certificate authority. And it's quite hard for each person to decide, yes, I trust Microsoft, I trust Ford, but I don't trust VeriSign, and I don't trust Linus University certificates. It's very hard for us to say that. So again, we have help of the manufacturer operating system. They have this list of trusted certificate authorities that we can go in and change if we want to, but we don't have to. So as long as we trust that list, which is quite well established, it works. But it's still a little bit hard because that list only contains a limited list of very high-ranked certificate authorities. And users somewhere may use another certificate authority that we don't know about. So how can we trust that certificate? We don't know anything about that certificate authority, who they used. Well, to help here, we have this hierarchy of different certificate authorities. So what they have done, all the certificate authorities, is that they have themselves created hierarchy between themselves, and they are cross-signing certificates between them. So what we get is this hierarchy we may, as a user down here somewhere, we may have used this certificate of authority B here, who is signing our certificates. Down here we have another user who is using another certificate of authority, and now we send something and we don't know what C is and they don't know what B is. But luckily, they have set up this hierarchy of different certificate of authorities who are cross-signing. And as long as we can find a chain here of certificate authorities that are signing each other, as long as we trust this one, we will also trust this one, even if we don't know about it. And again, of course, this comes down to that we actually have a trust in our certificate authority. We need to have a trust that they will check that they belong to a chain of certificate authorities that are valid and correct. So they are looking at each other to make sure that they are all doing the correct thing, and if some certificate authority would start to create fake certificates, they would be excluded from this chain of certificate authorities. And then when we test it, it wouldn't work. We couldn't validate it. So why would we revoke certificate? Well, here you can see different reasons for it. A user's private key is compromised. Well, that would be a quite severe one. We have our private key, but if we know it has been leaked, we accidentally told someone or someone hacked our computer and got it. Well, then, of course, we shouldn't trust anything that has been signed with that key. So at that stage, we go to our CA and say, revoke that certificate for that key because the private key is revoked. And if now someone tries to use it, the certificate is no longer valid then. Secondly, it could be that user no longer is certified by the CA. I said we need to have a business contact with the CA, and we may change that. We have used VeriSign for a couple of years. Now we would like to use Fort instead as the CA. So we set up a new business, and that means we revoke all our old certificates and start fresh now with our new CA. The worst would be number 3 here. The CA certificate is compromised. That would mean that the private key of a certificate authority has been compromised. And if that happens, then any certificate that is signed by that certificate authority is possibly a rogue one. Anyone who have got access to that private key can now start signing certificates or create fake certificates. So in that case, we would need to revoke all certificates that had been signed with that certificate authority's private key. So we add it to the revocation list. What does it need to revoke a key? What proof do we need to revoke a key? Well, we need the private key. Can that be misused? Can someone revoke our certificate with us, our knowing it? Well, only if they have hacked us and got access to our private key. And if they did, then we are happy that they will revoke it, because that was what we would like to happen then. So no one can revoke someone else's key without access to the private key. So there's no risk that things will be revoked accidentally here. Number 3 here has actually happened. Microsoft was compromised. So for a short while, the root certificate or the root private key that was used to sign certificates was hacked, and it was out there for a couple of hours or maximum a day, something like that. And that was maybe 6-7 years ago now. So after that, they had to revoke all the certificates made by that key and issue a new certificate with a new private key. Luckily, they didn't have time to create certificates that made any real damage. But they could have created certificates for any services and set up rogue servers, and people would have thought that they logged into to their bank or to Google or whatever, because they could create certificates for anyone using that private key. So that is the vulnerability in the system, and it has happened, but at that time it didn't lead to any known big problems, at least. So we have this CRL list, certificate revocation list. So whenever you go somewhere, to a website, for instance, that is protected with a certificate, how do you see that on a website if it's protected with a certificate?
It's a green lock.
Yeah, some type of lock. It looks a little bit different for different browsers, but typically you have some visual cue that says that yes, now you are an address that is protected with certificate and with SSL TLS encryption. Then can be a little key, or it can be a green or whatever. What that says us is that yes, they are using SSL TLS, and they are using there is a certificate in the background that protects it. At other places it's not so obvious, because we don't have this visual feedback showing that we are using a certificate and protect us that way. A problem is also that just because there is a certificate, that doesn't mean that very much. So it's really a bit of a security problem. Say that you go to your bank, you enter your bank domain in the browser, you get the feedback, you get the page. It says that you are protected with SSL TLS, it's green. Does that mean that, yes, everything is okay? Unfortunately not. It only says that you have reached a domain that is protected with a certificate. But as I said before, anyone can create a certificate. It doesn't say that it's the bank certificate that is used here. It can be a rogue web server. It can be even so that there's also someone that is using a DNS attack. So you actually given the bank's domain, but you end up in another server, and that server is getting back information to you about the certificate, and you create a secure connection. So what can you do to check that you are actually on the correct place, on the correct server? What is needed? Well, what do you do daily when you go to a web server? Do you check the credentials somehow? Can you check the credentials? Well, unfortunately, the situation is like we see it. Most people don't. They go to a website, they see, yes, we have an encryption channel, everything is okay, but that is really not the case. What you need to do is that you need to check the certificate that was used to create that secure, and you can do that, and that will be part of the first assignment here, to actually investigate the certificate that was used to create that secure channel. And then you can see who is the subject here, who is the issuer, and you can go and manually check if that is revoked or not. You can check that the issuer is really a valid issue and so on. But you have to manually do that in order to make sure that you are on the correct place. And since that is not obvious for everyone to do that, unfortunately most people don't do it. So that's why these rogue attacks or phishing attacks can work. Well, this very briefly, with X509 you can authenticate in different ways here. The first exchange shows just that A authenticates to B, and that is the typical situation. If you go to a web shop of some sort, you get the credentials from the web server, and that is used to set up the secure channel between you and your web shop. But you don't authenticate to the server with your certificate, because most people, well, today most people might have a certificate, but it's not typically used in those situations. So this is the typical way, but it's only one party that actually authenticates, and in most cases it's the server who authenticates. So that's okay. Typically what you do next is you log in. So you authenticate to the server, but not using SSL TLS and your certificate, use some other means of authenticating. But now you do that through this encrypted tunnel that was created after this first exchange. But it is possible for both parties to authenticate with certificates, both client and server side, to set up this secure connection. And it's also possible to have what's called a three-way handshake, where you first set up and then you just have a third message going back, just to be really sure that both parties have authenticated and that now both parties know that they have both been authenticated as well. So it's just an extra safe line. The version 3 extensions. Well, there are quite a few different extensions. We're seeing that, well, it could be good to know what the certificate is meant to be used for. So part of extension is that we can limit the use of a certificate. It may be only used for email, it may be only used for authenticating against a bank server, whatever. We can have some policy details, policy on when the certificate can be used. We can add other things requiring how it can be used. We can say that it can only be used within a certain country, for instance. So we can add different limitations for when a certificate is valid. All extensions have this information, an extension identifier, which means that, okay, this is how we should interpret the rest of the extension. So we can go to a description of the extension and learn how to read the rest of it. And then we have the critical indicator, which really just have two values. It's either saying that, well, this extension is not very critical. If you don't know how to interpret it, just disregard it. But if you don't know how to interpret it, then you can use the information in it if you want to. Or we can say that this extension is critical. If you don't know how to handle it, you couldn't use this certificate at all. You need to know how to deal with this information. And then we have values then, whatever it is, if it's policies or whatever. And then we have some examples of these extensions. One is called key and policy information, as it conveys information about the subject and issue keys and indicators of certificate policies, how it should be used. Can be certificate subject and issue attributes, so we have more information. Here we can add information about full name, information about addresses, phone numbers, whatever. And this one is quite interesting, certificate path constraints, where we can limit what CAs that we trust in. So we can, this chain hierarchy of CAs, we can limit, say, but, well, we only trust in a certain CA. We limit that so to make it even more secure. So these are just some examples of extensions that are other extensions as well. Then we have the PKI, a public key infrastructure. And a public key infrastructure is something that is on top of certificates, because X59 is just a standard for how to create a certificate. It doesn't help us to manage certificates, to know where to find them, how to create them, how to maintain them and so on. It's only a certificate and a standard for what a certificate is. So a PKI is trying to help us with managing certificates and the public keys that are protected with the certificates. So a public key infrastructure contains a sea of hardware, software, people, policies, procedures, with the task of managing certificates then. So this image shows the different components here. We have users. We have a repository of certificates and revocation lists. We have PKI management entities. These are different services, we can say. So at the top here we have what's called an end entity. That is the connection point to the users, where they can register, create certificates. Once they are created, they are registered on these lists here. We have a certificate authorities who are contacting other certificate authorities to create this chain of trust. We might have another issue of the revocation list. That can be a separate outside entity who's doing that to manage all the revoked certificates. So as you see, there are registration, installation, certification, recovery of keys, updates, revocation requests, course verification. There are a lot of different processes that go on between these different entities, and all that has to be standardized in order to make it work. And that is what a PKI is then. We also talked about lifetime of keys, and that's of course true for these public keys, the same as for session keys. They have a limited lifetime. They should have limited lifetime. So we'll have this cycle here. We start to generate a key. We get a certificate for it. Once we have a certificate, we can use it. Whenever we use it, it will be validated now and then. Hopefully it will work, but at some point it will fail because it had been revoked or the lifetime has expired. So at some time it expires, and then we have to create a new key, and then the cycle goes on. And all of this in the center here, we have this public key infrastructure that handles this, making sure that it works even if we update keys and so on. There are some problems with certificates, and one early problem with certificates was that it was up to on the client side to decide if you really check the certificate or not. So say that you log into some site on the internet and you get a certificate that should be used to protect the communication. Now, in order to decide if you want to trust in that certificate or not, you have to check it, right? So just first check it by looking at the certificate itself first. Is it still valid? Okay, if it's still valid, and you may look at some of the extensions to see is it valid in this situation or not. The next step would be to check if it's revoked. So you go to the server with a revocation list to ask for or search if it has been revoked or not. Now, this is a point of attack. What happens if the revocation list is not online? Can be that the server is down, can be that someone is performing denial of service attack, so it's impossible to access the revocation server. What should you do in that situation? Well, you have two options. Either you say, well, I can't check if it's revoked or not, which means that I can't trust the certificate, so I won't use it. So now you can't use the service. Or you say that, okay, I can't check the certificate if it's revoked or not, but it's probably okay. So I get along, I trust it anyway. And that was the case early in history of browsers, web browsers, that they were implemented in a way that if you couldn't test it, you just ignored it. Which meant that if you could just shut out the revocation list, then you could easily set up fake servers and it wasn't secure anymore. A reason for that was that at that time internet wasn't working very well, so it was quite often that you couldn't reach a certain server. So they didn't want to mess with people. They want the people to be able to access things. But today it's changed. Now you really need to check it, and it will be checked automatically each time you use the certificate if it has been revoked or not. But there are other things that are still problematic, and that is why we have this added standard, which is called as a certificate transparency. Was initially experimental internet protocol, but today I think it's an real standard, and it's implemented in several different browsers. It helps to eliminate flaws in SSL TLS by providing a framework for monitoring and auditing SSL certificates in near real time, as I say. So the idea is that you should really check certificates more actively than before. You shouldn't just, when you get a new certificate, you should check if it's okay or not. You should actively check them. So we have this small figure here showing the ideas of it. You have a certificate authority over here, and you have a client here. So this could be a browser, typically. And within that browser, we now also have something called an auditor. So normally when we access a server, we have this TLS SSL handshake using certificate. We get the certificate initially from a certificate authority, but this auditor will also actively check against a log server what's going on. And the certificate authority have, as you see, something called a monitor, which means that they will monitor how certificates are used on internet. So the idea is that internet will be monitored all the time, looking for something that looks like a false certificate. And whenever we see something, we publish it on a log server, and clients always also look for anything that has been identified as something that seems to be rogue on this log server. So the idea is that if someone sets up a service, it should be rapidly identified as something wrong, and it should be notified in a log server, and clients can start protect even if the certificate hasn't been revoked yet. So it's something that should be much faster response than having to revoke certificates. So it's a monitoring system that tries to help making SSL TLS even more secure. Okay, lastly, on this lecture we have what's called federated identity management. And Federated means that we would like to scale up authentication, you can say, or as I say, identity management, but to authenticate identity of people in different ways. We would like to be able to use someone else to handle identity management for us. Can you think of a situation when you're using this? Identity management, outsourced identity management.
When you access like government websites.
Okay, when you access the government website, who is handling the identity management then?
The government itself.
Well, if it is the government themselves, then it's not a federated identity management, because then they are doing it themselves. So the idea is that we have a service that we would like to offer, but we don't want to handle the messy part of identifying people. We would like someone else to do that for us.
Is this like using bank ID?
Yeah, bank ID, what in Sweden is an example of that. We outsource authentication to someone else, in this case bank ID. And a lot of different, for instance, government system is using it now. When you log in, you don't log into the government, you log in using your bank ID. That is how you authenticate. So that's one example. Of anything else? Yeah?
Facebook login.
Yeah. You log into different web services using your Facebook account or your Google account. Again, those services are now using Facebook or Google to handle identity management for them. So these are good examples for when federated identity management is used. It requires quite a lot of things. Authentication means that we need to prove who we are somehow, regardless of we log in directly to a service or to a federated, we need to authenticate. Authorization means about what we are allowed to do. That is also needed still. We need to know if we have identified, but what can we actually do at this site? It can be different things. Accounting could be needed. It could be a service that actually cost per use or whatever. Provisioning is about how we roll it out. We have to be able to sign up somewhere. We need to handle the communication between the service and the federated identity management. So we need to have a flow of how things should work, and that is provisioning. It needs to be more or less automated, this workflow. Think about Facebook. They handle billions of users. They couldn't do that manually. So they need to be automated. Whenever a new server would like to use Facebook to authenticate, it really needs to work automatically. Delegated administration means that part of the administration need to be delegated. We couldn't, and that means whenever we are using a federated identity management, some things are handled by them and some are handled by us, and we need to trust each other with what we are doing. They are handling users, we are handling probably authorization, what they can do. So we have to split it up somehow. Single sign-on is an important driving factor behind this. Instead of requiring people to use different user IDs with different passwords, all the different systems they're using, which easily could be tens or up maybe 100 per day. They only log in once and then they have already authenticated themselves. So they only have to sign in once per day perhaps. Self-service password reset is needed, part of the workflow automation, because people forget their passwords. I know people who use that. Instead of remembering passwords on systems they use just now and then, they just reset it each time. And if that was done manually, people would get crazy handling all these password requests. And and then the federation is just to tie everything together. So it may look like this. Here we have principal. Principal are the ones who should be able to log in somewhere to authenticate. Now, principal have attributes, and there could be different type of attributes. An attribute could be your name, it could be your address, phone number, your password. These are different attributes that are connected to a principal. Some of these attributes could be provided by the principals. You know who you are. But some attributes are probably given by administrators. And that could be, for instance, what you're supposed to be able to do. When you log into our email system, you are allowed to handle your user account. That is what the administrator says. But if you log in as an administrator, you are allowed to do other things as well. So what we can do can be attributes that is given by someone else. Things that we couldn't decide on ourselves. The identity provider keep information about the principals, of course, and how to authenticate them. And then we have data consumers, and data consumers are the ones that are using the identity provider. They want to, this could be a web server that would like to use Facebook. So Facebook handles the authentication, and then the data consumer is communicating with Facebook to make sure that you have authenticated. But they may also need these attributes to know exactly who you are. An example, when you log into the wireless network here, you are using eduroam, which is one of these federated identity managers or managed systems. As you know, you can use that when you log into other universities around Europe and in the world as well. You use your same username and credential. This is where you identify yourself. You give your username and password. But then, when you get somewhere, they also want to know who are you, what type of person are you? Are you a student or are you staff? And depending on that, that is an attribute. Depending on if you're a staff or student, you may be doing different things. You may be allowed to just a public network, or you may be allowed to get into the more inner network of organization. So we need both information about who we are, but also attributes, depending on who the consumer is. So we have these parties. We have the user, we have a service provider, we have an identity provider, and an administrator. So, as I said, this could be Facebook, Google, this could be some server, and this is you. And all of these need to be linked in somehow in order to build this federation. We take it very briefly here at the end. We can do it on different levels. There are different types of federation depending on how close we tie different things together here. So say something called federation based on account linking, federation based on roles, and chain web services. So these are different ways to build how much trust we have, how hard it will be to tie in the different services to the service provider or the identity provider. Yes, I got a question here on the chat. Open Authentication 2, yes, that is one of the standards that can be used to build federations. So here we have some other examples of standards that we use. XML is used as a standard to create the messages that are needed to send between the different parties here. SOAP, Simple Object Access Protocol, is a protocol for accessing services remote services. That can be part of a setup here. VS security, or web service security, is a standard that is actually built on SOAP and XML to build a way to manage identities or services that someone else is authenticating. So it's one of the early standards that try to actually build federated identity management on the web. We have another protocol or standard here called SAML, Security Assertion Markup Language. That's a SAML 2 now as well. It's the XML-based language for exchange of security information between online business partners. So it's a structured way how to create the messages that are needed in a secure way with encryption and what is needed for that. And it also, as you see, conveys authentication information between the different parties here. SCIBLF is one of the standards that came out from something called the Internet 2 project. It was a huge project that was started in the United States maybe 15, 20 years ago, where they said, okay, we have internet. Let's see what we need for the next level. So they started up this Internet 2 project, and they had lots of different things going on. And some of the things that came out from that Internet 2 project actually made it to production system. And SCIBLF is one of those things that were developed that are now used on internet then for, as you see, handle remote login with where you have an internet provider and you have these attributes. So for instance, SCIBLF is exactly what is used for EduRoam, one of the standards that is used there, together with SAML 2 that is used to create how the message should look. So SCIBLF is more of a protocol for who should exchange information with who and how that interaction should be, and SAML is how the messages should be formatted, you can say. Well, I think we can trust. Of course, you need to think about trust when you build a federation, because now you extending your organization, your system to someone else. You outsource identity authentication or identity management. So how can we trust that? Do we have full trust in that identity provider or just partial trust? Depending on that, we can build up the trust models differently between different parties here. So we may trust them to do some things, but not some things, or we can have full trust. So there are different models for that, but let's not talk about the details there. So 10 minutes late, we are done with the last slides. Some questions before we stop today. Yes?
I have a question about the key exchange. You mentioned 4 different ways where you can distribute a key. That would be manually.
Yeah.
What about the Diffie-Hellman key exchange protocol?
Yep. Diffie-Hellman is a key exchange protocol, and that is actually a way to make it automatic instead of having to do it manually. But that is using a public key encryption. And what we are focusing on in the beginning of the slide was how to handle just with symmetric keys.
Oh, okay.
And with symmetric keys, you need to do some manual work here. It's impossible. But you can add Diffie-Hellman to do that for you but then you are using a public key, and yeah, that works. So there's, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, actually, how we can use Diffie-Hellman in just that regard. Okay, so yes, assignment introduction question, you will have that at 5 this afternoon then. So go to the Zoom room at 5 o'clock and you will meet Uras for the first time, and he will talk about the first assignment. Okay, see you on Thursday again.